Today, we're doing something maybe a bit different, possibly our most radical deep dive so far.
Uh-huh.
We're looking at the actual evolutionary origin of consciousness.
Right.
Not just the usual mind-body problem, the philosophical stuff. We're asking a really hard question.
Oh.
Where did this whole inner world, the planning, memories, that voice in your head, where did it actually come from? When did it evolve?
It's a huge question. And honestly, the traditional answers, they aren't very satisfying, are they?
Oh.
You've basically got three camps. One says consciousness is just like a basic property of life, even down to protoplasm. Another links it to learning. But that's tricky because we learn so much unconsciously.
Yeah.
And the third looks for a specific brain part, maybe the reticular activating system.
Okay.
But the sources we looked at, they push us towards a really different starting point. A pretty surprising idea, actually. That consciousness, the kind we experience every day, wasn't actually needed for a lot of early human civilization to work.
Okay, hang on. Let's unpack that. Because that sounds completely wrong, doesn't it?
It does feel wrong.
We feel like our conscious thoughts are in charge. Like, I'm the CEO in my head. But you're saying the evidence suggests, maybe not, that consciousness is often just watching.
Yeah, like a helpless spectator, as one source puts it. And the evidence is pretty compelling when you start digging.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about really complex skills. A concert pianist, right? They're doing hundreds of tiny, precise movements, reading music, coordinating everything. But consciously, they often say they're just lost in the music, in this like seventh heaven of artistic rapture.
So the consciousness isn't running the fingers, basically.
Not directly, no. It's crucial for learning the skill, definitely. But once it's automatic, consciousness can actually get in the way. It can slow you down, make you second guess.
Is that why things like negative practice work? We read about that, practicing mistakes on purpose.
Exactly, like deliberately typing ite instead of the. You do it consciously until the unconscious habit, the automatic struction as the source calls it, breaks down. It shows the skill wasn't under conscious control.
Struction, like instruction and construction combined.
Precisely. And this idea is really key for understanding judgment too.
How so?
Think about a simple judgment, like pick up two things. Which one's heavier?
Okay.
You don't consciously watch yourself weigh the options and decide. The decision just arrives. It's just given by your nervous system.
Ah, so the struction is that automatic process. You're aware of the input, the feeling, and the output, the answer.
But not the middle part, not the actual calculation. That runs automatically.
Okay, if judgment is automatic, what about memory? We like to think we have this huge internal library we can just browse through.
Yeah, that's the illusion. But conscious recall, it's tiny, a thimbleful, compared to everything we clearly know, which recognition tasks prove.
Recognition being like knowing a face even if you can't place the name.
Exactly. And even when we do consciously remember, it's often, well, inaccurate. You're not pulling up raw data, you're reconstructing what you were conscious of before.
Like the swimming example, you remember seeing yourself swim.
Right. From outside your body, like a movie, a view you never actually had. You're creating a narrative, not replaying a recording.
Okay. So skills, judgment, memory access. A lot of the heavy lifting is unconscious. This leads to a pretty stark conclusion, doesn't it?
It really does. If all that complex stuff can run without subjective awareness, then it's technically possible you can imagine a whole race of humans who talked, solved problems, built cities, but weren't conscious at all. Not in our sense.
Wow. Okay. That's the big leap.
That's the pivot. The fact that consciousness might not be necessary for complex behavior opens the door to this other idea. The bicameral mind.
Hold on, though. Before we jump straight to ancient Greece, how can we possibly know they weren't conscious? If they're speaking, trading, building pyramids, that requires coordination, planning. Isn't this just unfalsifiable?
Speculation? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a fair challenge. The argument isn't that they were zombies. They obviously had complex cognition.
Right.
But the claim is that the mechanism of control, especially for volition, for deciding what to do, was different. And the evidence trail comes from what they left behind, their texts, their art, their social structures.
So if all those other functions, language, skill, judgment, can run unconsciously, the missing piece is that inner sense of I decide, subjective volition.
Precisely. And that is what seems absent in the earliest texts, like the Iliad.
Okay, so the Iliad, The Mycenaeans, you're saying they didn't have introspection. They didn't think, what should I do?
Not in the way we understand it. Volition wasn't an internal debate. It was experienced as an external command, an auditory hallucination, basically.
Voices.
Voices, the voices of the gods. Planning, decisions, initiative. It was all organized unconsciously and then told to the person.
And there's a neurological hypothesis for this.
Yes, the sort of strong form of the theory. It suggests this was actually about how the two hemispheres of the brain communicated back then.
Go on.
The idea is that the speech of the gods, this complex command, was generated in the right hemisphere, specifically in the area corresponding to Wernicke's area on the right side, the non-dominant side for language in most people.
Okay, the right side generates the command.
And then it was heard by the auditory processing areas in the left hemisphere, the side more involved in executing speech and action.
How did it get across?
Through the anterior commissures.
Which the sources said were really small.
Tiny, like an eighth of an inch across. Imagine trying to send complex instructions, battle plans, farming schedules across that narrow bridge.
So language becomes super important.
Exactly. Language was the efficient code, the compressed file format, if you like, to get these complex directives from the right hemisphere to the left across that limited connection.
And the Iliad characters show this because they don't wrestle with decisions.
Pretty much. They get told what to do, the famous bit with Achilles and Agamemnon. Achilles is enraged, ready to draw his sword. But then the goddess Athene just appears, grabs his hair, and tells him straight out, don't do it.
The god literally stops him.
The god intervenes, commands. The action follows the voice. There's no internal should I, shouldn't I. The gods, in effect, are his consciousness, directing his actions.
And this worked for their society.
It seems it did for a very rigid hierarchical society. The Linear B tablets, once they were deciphered, showed Mycenaean Greece wasn't quite the heroic free-for-all of the poem. It was a strict theocracy, lots of lists, inventories, everything owed to the ruler and the gods. Obedience was key.
And we see similar patterns elsewhere in other early civilizations.
Yes, the archaeological evidence lines up quite well, actually. Look at the layout of early cities, Jericho, even Mayan cities. What's the center?
A temple.
A god house, exactly. Not usually a palace. The god's precinct was the operational hub. The commands presumably originated there or were associated with it.
It also explains some weird stuff about how they treated the dead, right? The Ilani.
It makes sense of it, yeah. Why treat the dead as if they're still alive, leave food in tombs? Because their voices, their authoritative commands, their ka in Egypt, or Ilani, as Mesopotamian texts called the dead, were potentially still being heard.
Like the king buried facing the mountain.
At Ainon, yeah, propped up, facing Mount Hermon, suggests his voice, his authority, was still directing the group even after death. The dead literally became gods, sources of command.
And the idols, those statues with the huge eyes.
Creepy, aren't they? But probably functional. From places like Uruk, Mari, eyes taking up like 20% of the head, often inlaid with shiny stones.
To grab your attention.
Exactly. Visual cues, focusing on those huge hypnotic eyes could help trigger or focus the auditory hallucination, the god's voice. There are even much later reports, like from the Spanish in Peru, saying the natives claimed the devil, quote, actually spoke out of the mouths of their statues. It shows how persistent that mechanism could be.
Okay, so this bicameral hallucination-driven system runs things for thousands of years, but it eventually breaks down. The Great Transilliance, what happened?
Chaos happened, basically. The second millennium BC was just one disaster after another. You had the massive eruption of Thera destabilizing the whole region.
Right.
Mass migrations, the mysterious sea peoples causing havoc, invasions from newly powerful empires like Assyria. The old, rigid system just couldn't cope.
Too slow. Too inflexible.
Probably. And maybe too prone to conflicting voices when things got really stressful. The whole hallucinatory control system got strained, maybe past its breaking point.
And the gods started to disappear.
That's how it looks in the art and texts. Compare Hammurabi's code in Still a God is right there, actively dictating the law. Then, a few centuries later, you see the Assyrian king Tukulti-Ninurta kneeling before an empty throne on his altar. The gods are withdrawing, becoming distant, unhappy, as some texts say.
So, if the guiding voices fall silent, what do people do?
They start desperately looking for other ways to figure out the god's will or just what to do next. You see this explosion of divination methods.
Omens, casting lots.
Exactly. Reading sheep livers, throwing knuckle bones, gorals, interpreting random events, trying to find guidance anywhere they could. It was like the first fumbling attempts to create a narrative, to figure out the story when the director stopped shouting instructions.
And this is where consciousness, our kind of consciousness, starts to emerge. The sources say it was invented through metaphor.
That's the really fascinating part of the theory. Consciousness wasn't just waiting to happen. It was constructed, culturally learned, using language as the building material.
How does that work? Language creating consciousness.
Well, language is like another sense organ, isn't it? It lets us perceive things that aren't physically there, abstract concepts. And how do we grasp abstractions? Through metaphor.
Like understanding something means standing under it.
Kind of, yeah. Or think about the word to be. It likely comes from an old Sanskrit root meaning to breathe. We take concrete physical actions and feelings and use them to build abstract ideas. So when the external voices faded, Humies needed an internal space to simulate possibilities, to see themselves acting before doing it. They created an analog space in their minds using language.
And inside that space, they needed a character, the analog I.
Exactly. The metaphorical you, the protagonist in your inner narrative, the I who weighs options in that mental space.
And we can see this happening in language itself, like in ancient Greek.
We can trace it. In the Iliad, words related to thought are very physical. Friends, it's the lungs, the midriff, where you feel agitation. Crady, the heart, where you feel fear or excitement. They're just bodily reactions.
But later those words mean mind or spirit.
They start to shift. Those physical feelings become metaphors for internal mental states. Friends becomes the location of thought. News emerges closer to intellect. And the really big invention was the psyche, the soul.
Why was the soul so important?
Because psyche allowed the idea of a life separate from the physical body, a life that exists through time, that allows you to create an I with a past, present, and future in that analog mind space. It enables self-identity as we know it.
So consciousness isn't innate, it's a learned cultural technology built with language.
That's the core idea, built on the ruins of that older bicameral system.
Which brings us to today. Does any of that older system linger? Do we see traces of the bicameral mind now?
The theory suggests we do, yeah, especially when the modern conscious mind is under extreme stress or breaks down.
Like in schizophrenia.
It maps remarkably well onto the symptoms of schizophrenia, the loss of the analog I, that feeling of agency, the erosion of the internal mind space, and critically, the return of commanding, often terrifying, auditory hallucinations, voices that seem external.
Wow. And didn't the ancient Greeks have a word? Paranoia.
They did, and it literally meant something like having another mind alongside one's own, which fits perfectly with this idea of a competing non-conscious system reasserting itself.
Are there other examples? What about hypnosis?
Hypnosis looks like tapping into that older system, too. The hypnotized person often reports a loss of their subjective eyes. They feel passive, waiting for instructions from the hypnotist. It's like temporarily reverting to that bicameral reliance on an external voice for volition.
And it works better on some people than others.
Intriguingly, yes. People who had imaginary friends as kids, or grew up in very strict command-based households, they tend to be more hypnotizable.
Like those bicameral pathways got more exercise.
That's the speculation, yeah, that the neurological potential was kept more active, perhaps.
This old system must have been incredibly powerful. Does it relate to things like poetry or music? They feel different from just talking.
Definitely. The theory suggests poetry might have originated as the divine speech itself, heard by the ancient bards, often in meter, and song. Well, music processing is largely a right hemisphere function, even today.
Ah, so there's still that hemispheric difference.
Right. Try singing about a complex, abstract topic spontaneously. It's hard. The singing often crumbles into cliches, as the source material puts it. It's like the left hemisphere's abstract organization is fighting with the right hemisphere's musical output for that limited channel between them.
It's amazing to think that the genetic basis for this, which might present as schizophrenia now, could have actually been beneficial back then.
It's quite possible. Think about the advantages in the bicameral era. Tirelessness, incredible endurance. If you're just executing commands from gods, you're not slowed down by subjective fatigue, doubt, or worry.
Perfect for building pyramids or fighting wars.
Exactly. You just do what the voice tells you. That could have been a powerful selective advantage for those societies.
Incredible. So, to wrap up, consciousness, as we know it, isn't some inevitable endpoint of evolution. It's a cultural invention, learned, built with language, on the foundations of a very different, ancient way of being human, a way driven by voices, not introspection.
That's the picture painted by these sources. And maybe one final thought for you, for the listener to consider.
Go on.
When we developed this subjective consciousness, this analog I, we also created a new kind of suffering. Basic biological effects, fear, shame. They're common to mammals, right? They flare up, the threat passes, they fade.
Right.
But when we started processing these feelings through consciousness, linking them to our sense of self, our lifetime, fear became chronic anxiety, shame became persistent guilt.
Because they got stuck in the narrative.
Exactly. Unlike the biological fight or flight response, these new conscious emotions, anxiety and guilt, they didn't have a built-in, biologically evolved mechanism of stopping. We became the authors of our own actions, yes. But the price was perhaps a lifetime of worry.